Let me tell you, I really liked the Sonic movie 3, and I think the reason why I really liked it is because it wasn't literally just a retelling of Sonic Adventure 2. It had its own story that really worked well in my opinion. I already said this on Twitter, but I don't think the goal of this movie was to recreate SA2, but instead recapture the feelings the game invokes, and I think it really does that well, especially in the third act. I even believe that there are things in this movie that it does better than Sonic Adventure 2 or any of the Sonic games have done before. Like, for example, I think the relationship between Shadow and Maria is much better here than anything we've seen before, and I think that that's simply just because this is a movie. They're allowed to have a lot more time showcasing Shadow and Maria, and they kind of have to in order to really get across Shadow's emotion. I think it's a fair statement, and I think everyone should agree on this, but a movie story is much more important than a game story. So if the game decides to gloss over a few things, it's like whatever, but a movie really can't do that, otherwise you risk that emotional impact that you're going to have on your audience. In other words, this movie really had to make sure you felt the emotion between Shadow and Maria. You had to make sure that you knew how close they were and why it's so important that Shadow lost her and basically everything else he cared about. Now this part might be a hot take, but I kinda like what they did with Shadow's origin. As opposed to him being created by Gerald Robotnik to treat Maria's NIDS disease, we have him arriving in a meteorite. Now I think the reason why I like this so much is that he grapples with his own humanity because he doesn't know if he was allowed to fit in with society because of the fact that he's an alien. Not to mention, the fact that he also arrives in a meteorite really sets up the whole Black Arms storyline really well if they want to dive into that in a future TV show or a movie. And I just think that the way that the games have done it is not complicated, but I think it's more complicated than this approach just because, I mean, with the games, you have Gerald creating Shadow, but then also getting assistance from the Black Arms and then using their DNA to really make Shadow the ultimate life form. And I think when you get into all that, there's a lot more to explain with Shadow's backstory, and I think it wouldn't have worked as smoothly as it did in the Sonic movie 3, especially with the length that it is. We have, what, an hour and 50 minutes or something like that? I feel like if they were to really go into the whole Black Arms thing, it would take them significantly more time to execute all of that backstory plot with also finishing the main narrative. With Shadow coming from a meteorite in space, you have this whole idea that there's a lot more to the character that we still don't know, but we don't need to know at this point. And if you have a Shadow the Hedgehog movie or TV show, that gives the opportunity for you to really delve into it. Personally, I don't mind the creative liberty that the movie took on this front, and it also really explains why we don't see any characters like BioLizard or Final Hazard show up. Now on to a creative liberty that I wasn't entirely a fan of, and that's Gerald Robotnik. Now, this might sound a little strange because he's actually like an essential part of the plot, and the fact that I don't like it kind of compromises the entire movie, but hear me out for a sec. I should probably rephrase, the issue actually isn't with Gerald Robotnik entirely, it's more so about the tone and placement of sequences within the movie itself. Like, for example, we'll go from like a really cool action sequence with Sonic and Shadow or Sonic and other characters to Eggman and Gerald doing something silly. Like, for example, I remember with the Super Sonic and Super Shadow fight sequence where we have them in space destroying all of the gun robots. Then we just go straight to Eggman and Gerald's giving Eggman a spanking with like a giant Thanos arm. I think that's where we like lose it. And I don't know, I think it was stuff like this that kind of made me like, alright, you kind of, especially because like, I think a scene like that interrupts like Live and Learn. That's like the hype song. That's what all Sonic fans have been craving for. So when you have like Gerald giving Eggman a spanking, interrupting Live and Learn, it's like, oh come on, like you can't do that, you know what I'm saying? And we also get sequences between Gerald and Eggman that I think just take place way too long. Like the dancing sequence with the lasers, and the same thing goes for like the, I guess, time loss sequence where like Eggman's getting a chance to like relive all his childhood experiences with Gerald there. I mean, I don't know, not to be that guy or anything, but it gets to a certain point where I'm like, okay, we get it. Eggman has this connection that he hasn't had before. Let's get to like the main event here. Let's get to the action. And to be clear, I didn't hate these scenes, I just think they would have benefited from being a little shorter, because it gets to a point, once again, where it's like, we get it. We as the audience get it. Now I want to take some time to talk about Sonic in this movie, and I think a lot of people are of the belief that he gets significantly better by the end of the movie, and I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think so. I think Sonic is kind of the same as he was by the end of Sonic 2. I don't really see a ton of character development within him, even though I feel like there could have been, especially with like Tom getting like almost dead from Shadow. But keeping it like 100% real right here, I feel like Sonic, he just does the same thing he did in like the past 2 other Sonic movies, where like he's not serious, he locks in, and then he's not serious again.
Konnichiwa?
I'm not saying he needs a reason to be serious by the end of the movie, because like the problem's solved. Why do you need to stay locked in? But at the same time, your character can still change in the way you act and carry yourself. And I don't really see that happening here with Sonic's character, even though there wasn't that much time after like the end battle to the end of the movie. But still, I feel like we need to see more to really say that Sonic has changed as a character. Because, keeping it real with you, he feels the same as Sonic 2. Not Sonic 1 though. Sonic 1, I feel like he's a lot more jokey in that. But 2 and 3 feel like a very similar character to me. On the other hand, with characters like Knuckles and Tails, who I actually thought were going to get significantly less screen time in this movie, oh my gosh, I feel like they just get better. I feel like we're allowed to see these characters at their fullest, and with Team Sonic kind of working cohesively the entire movie, or most of it, it's like, man, this is awesome. And don't even get me started on Shadow. I think Shadow is like one of the best written characters in this movie, even though he has lines like Revenge Guac, which I just think is a funny throwaway line. Like, it's not like it was an entire sequence dedicated to it, it was just, you know, a whatever, which I thought was funny. Now, one of the last things I want to talk about in this movie is the dynamic between Sonic and Shadow. Now, I think the movie sets it up where Sonic and Shadow are going to have a different kind of relationship than they do in the games, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what's next. As you know, with the second post-credit scene, Shadow the Hedgehog is still alive, and I think with that in mind, he'd have no reason to be this person who doesn't really care about Sonic or resents Sonic or whatever. I think they did a very interesting thing with this movie in comparison to the games. Now, in the games, we have Amy Rose talking to Shadow and convincing him that this is not what Maria would have wanted. But in the movie, we have Sonic do that. And I feel like with that, Shadow builds a more emotional connection to Sonic that I think goes a lot deeper than it does in the games. In the games, Sonic has no idea who Maria even is. I don't even really think that Sonic knows Shadow's backstory, to be honest. But with Shadow and Sonic kind of having that time talking on the moon, it's like they both understand each other on a deeper level than they do in the games. To me, I think the game that best portrays Sonic and Shadow's relationship is Sonic 06. The two of them have no animosity towards one another, they're just there helping one another out, and they respect each other mutually. But I think with this movie, they're taking it up a notch, where it's not just respect, but it's also like, yeah, you know what? You're my brother, I got you, no big deal. But we also have a rivalry. Like, with Super Sonic and Super Shadow fighting the gun robots in space, it was Shadow saying to Sonic, try to keep up. Like, I love that kind of dynamic because it's like, the two of them have no animosity towards each other, and they don't really have a reason to. Honestly, if done right, I think this execution of Shadow and Sonic's relationship could be better done here in the movies than in the games, and let me tell you why. So, with the games, we have Shadow designated as this kind of anti-hero type character, or at least he has been for the past several years. Like, everyone knows him as like the anti-hero, but we never see that. We never see Shadow really doing something that polar opposite Sonic or goes against what Sonic wants to do. Like, for example, the most we'll ever really see of that is Sonic and Shadow fighting for the Yellow Chaos Emerald in Sonic Generations. But that's really it. And if you want to get technical with it, Sonic fought Silver in that game too. And those two aren't even anti-heroes or rivals or whatever, it's just two characters going at it for no reason. Like, Silver just didn't believe that he was the real Sonic or whatever. So, Sonic fights everyone in Generations, even if they are friends. That said though, Shadow never does anything to really antagonize Sonic. And if he does, it's the two of them having the same goal, just different ways of doing things, which isn't really an anti-hero. I guess to make a long story short, I feel like the movie's relationship between Sonic and Shadow will feel a lot more natural if done correctly than the games do it. But maybe that's just a hot take on my part, I don't know. But let's get to the post-credit scene. So, with the ultimate post-credit scene, we have Amy and Metal Sonic. We already talked about Shadow and that he's still alive, but Amy and Metal Sonic are here, and I feel like there's a lot to be discussed there, but let me just say, I'm very hyped for it. Not to say I wasn't expecting it, but that is really cool to see that this universe is continuing with these two characters, and I honestly am wondering, who created these Metal Sonics? Is Eggman still alive? All of these things are definitely at play, and the fact that this scene seems to take place immediately after like Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles go on that race makes me believe that Eggman couldn't have created it, because this feels too soon after the events of like the final battle movie, where we know that Eggman supposedly died, but he'll probably be back like he always is. It's just gonna be like an unexplained thing, like how Eggman survived, but it doesn't matter. It's one of those things that's just funny. But there's a lot to discuss here, and I think we'll do it in a separate video because we're already almost at 10 minutes here with this one. So, with all that said and done, look forward to the next video by hitting the post notifications bell, leaving a like on this one, and commenting down below your thoughts on the Sonic movie 3. Don't forget to do all of that and subscribe to the channel. But with all that said and done, this is your boy SONICSTA signing out. Have a super blessed day, y'all.
Why are you playing that trash?